Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst, or perhaps slow motion, pillow flop style, into the drippy, golden, hopelessly tangled world of Byzantine olive oil permits and the bureaucracy that tried and mostly failed to control them. Picture this: thousands of little glass lamps glimmering across Constantinople, their tiny flames fed day and night with precious olive oil. You can almost smell it, slightly earthy, a touch green with the faintest hint of smoke. That warm glow wasn't free, though. No. It required permits, quotas, stamps, signatures, inspections, re-inspections, stamps on the inspections, receipts for the stamps, and permission slips for the receipts. You probably won't survive this, or at least you won't stay awake for it, which is sort of the point. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there, so please drop that in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a narrow street in Constantinople, clutching a wax-covered slip of papyrus that you're told will allow you to deliver exactly 1 amphora of olive oil to a church just over the hill. The air is still thick with damp smoke from yesterday's incense, and your sandals slip slightly on the worn flagstones. That precious oil is not just for cooking. It feeds the flame of hundreds of hanging sanctuary lamps, each one kept burning in front of an icon. Without the oil, the lamps go dark, and that to a Byzantine was unthinkable. They took their holy lamps very seriously. In the great Hagia Sophia alone, the oil lamps needed to be topped up so often that there was an entire post in the church staff just for trimming wicks and polishing glass. You picture this job: a slightly stooped old man, his robes stained with soot and olive oil, carefully carrying a dripping jug through the echoing nave. There's something sleepy and oddly soothing about it if you ignore the fact that he had to show a stamped permit each time he refilled a lamp. One mainstream fact here is that the Byzantine church system truly ran on olive oil. It was as essential to the ritual life as incense or hymn singing, and Byzantine citizens saw its steady flow as a sign of God's continuing favor. But where there's bureaucracy, there's always a catch. Historians still argue whether the average parish priest could even afford all the paperwork needed to keep his lamps fueled. Some records hint that priests pooled their meager funds to pay an official oil overseer, hoping he'd file the correct papers without skimming a few coins. You pause at a checkpoint, yes, even within the city they had these, and the board official gestures you forward. His robe is a little too short, revealing dusty sandals, and he barely looks up as he demands to see your permit. You try to hand it over carefully, since the wax seal is still soft in the summer heat. The official sighs, breaks the seal with a dull iron stylus, and then waves you through. A quirky fringe tidbit about these olive oil permits is that sometimes they included handwritten prayers squeezed into the margins, as if begging divine mercy for the clerks themselves. You can almost hear them. God grant me patience. To tally this oil for my master is relentless. These scrawled lines are barely legible, but they hint at the quiet frustrations of the Byzantine working class. Moving on, you descend toward a smaller church, where the deacon is fretting because he can't light the main lamp before dusk. His last shipment was delayed thanks to the port inspectors holding the barrels overnight. Your own delivery might save his evening service, but only if you arrive in time. And here's the kicker: only if you have the second slip of paper authorizing the priest himself to receive the oil. A permit for giving a permit for receiving, and probably a permit to acknowledge the permit. The gentle hush of the church calms your steps, as if the golden glow ahead is already settling your breathing. You remember the scent of olive oil again, fresh, slightly green, soft, blending with the older notes of beeswax candles. These are the moments that keep you going, even if you roll your eyes at the endless forms and fees. For a moment, you stop at a public fountain, letting cool water slip over your dusty hands. Behind you, the great dome of Hagia Sophia looms like a benevolent mother sheltering the city in marble wings. Somewhere deep in its shadows, a tired clerk is probably still writing out permits by lamplight, each slip of parchment curling a bit from the damp sea air. Tomorrow you'll do it again, trudging across the flagstones with another amphora, another permit, another inspection. The system grinds on, and so do you, half amused, half weary. And yet you sense that those flickering lamps mean more than light. They are hope, prayers and reminders of divine order. You stand quietly for a moment before handing the oil over to the deacon. He thanks you with a grave nod, then takes out a fresh wick, dipping it carefully into the golden liquid. Watching the flame catch, you realize that while the permits feel pointless, the glow they protect is something you'd rather not live without. You step back from the little church, letting the fading sun warm your shoulders as you slip the next permit into your belt. Stamped in wax and dust, this fragile piece of Byzantine paperwork looks almost too pathetic to matter, yet somehow it controls your entire journey. You can feel a crumbly bit of red wax already threatening to chip off, and you sigh because that's the only proof you'll have if someone challenges your delivery rights. Byzantine stamps were a world of their own, thick lumps of wax pressed with everything from imperial eagles to tiny crosses officially validated each document. These seals were the empire's way of shouting, "This is real," even when the paper underneath was half rotten and smelled of fish oil from being recycled. A mainstream historical fact is that the Byzantines actually invented a kind of notary system centuries before Western Europe standardized theirs using sealed documents to guarantee authenticity. Of course, that didn't stop fraud. It turns out a determined forger could carve a passable, fake seal out of olive wood if he had enough time and a steady hand. Historians still argue whether the frauds were so common that local priests simply shrugged and accepted them, or if the state cracked down harshly on every whiff of forgery. It's comforting in a sleepy sort of way to know that even 1,000 years ago, paperwork fraud was a career path. As you wander along the porticoed street, the scent of dust and warm brick mixes with something sharp vinegar, maybe from a tavern down the block. You can practically taste the vinegar on the wind, reminding you that life in Constantinople was a swirl of flavors and smells, good and bad, from roast lamb to rotting fish guts. You slip into a quiet archway to examine your permit again. There, pressed into the wax, is a faint cross. It gives you a strange sense of security, like a lucky charm. You wonder who pressed it. A bored scribe with inky fingertips, or some ceremonial officer with a ribbon-braided robe. The seal's edges are already going soft in the heat, and you know you have to hurry before someone claims it's a forgery. Passing through the forum, you catch sight of a government clerk with a small wooden table surrounded by traders waving their own papers like angry geese. He's holding a stamp, the iron stylus, barely leaving his hand, methodically smashing wax onto each permit with an audible thunk. You can almost feel the thunk echoing through your ribcage, soothing in its repetition like a hammer lulling you to sleep. A fringe tidbit that might surprise you is that some stamp taxes were so elaborate the wax was blended with tiny bits of ground marble powder just to make it harder to copy. Imagine the crunch of that marble under the official's seal, a bit gritty, a bit silly, a bit magnificent. Of course, that also meant if you dropped the document in a puddle, the marble would sink it like a stone. You edge forward again, your feet scuffing through crushed bits of olive leaves left by other merchants. Those olive leaves crunch faintly, and you catch yourself grinning. There's something comforting about bureaucracy's slow, predictable beat, even when it stifles you. At least everyone is stuck in the same tangle. Up ahead, a checkpoint inspector is leaning on a battered lectern. You've seen him before, a stooped fellow with a half-missing ear. No one really asks about that, by the way, who always seems more interested in gossip than the actual job. Today, he gives you a look that says, "Owe you again," and then waves you through after a lazy glance at the wax seal. You keep walking, feeling a breeze off the golden horn. Lift the curls of your hair, carrying a tang of salt and ship tar. Somewhere barrels of olive oil are being rolled down wooden ramps, each one waiting for the same stamps, the same dust, the same endless permits. The port's chaotic orchestra clatters around you, donkey hooves, creaking wheels, barked orders, but in your mind it starts to fade, becoming a drowsy rhythm like distant rain. A child darts past you, carrying a sealed slip bigger than his own head. Maybe he's a runner for the monastery kitchens, ferrying permission to light the refectory lamps tonight. You catch the boy's grin and remember how you once dreamed of becoming a ship captain, not a licensed oil carrier. Life's funny that way, reshaping your hopes until they fit the mold of your daily permit routine. It grows quieter as you round the corner into a shadowy arcade. The warm scent of olive oil seems to follow you, mingling with a sweet hint of beeswax candles from a vendor's stall. Maybe you pause there, letting your eyes close for a moment, lulled by the flicker of tiny flames dancing behind glass. Even this boring moment has its own sleepy grace. When you finally step out again, the light has softened into a peach-colored dusk. You clutch your dusty permit, grateful it survived one more day, one more round of approvals. Somewhere deep in the palace archives, a ledger records your name, your cargo, and maybe a note about how clumsy you looked at the checkpoint. You almost laugh, but instead you just exhale, sinking into the comforting realization that as long as you hold that seal, you belong here, part of a vast, oil-lit machine that never really stops turning. You find yourself drawn toward the harbor again, following the faint slap of water against barnacled hulls. The air tastes of sea salt and sun-baked rope, with an undertone of something fattier, a note of olives, crushed and stored in heavy clay jars, stacked like lazy soldiers on the pier. Even from here, you can practically hear the grumbles of port officials wrestling with a fresh shipment of oil and all its tangled paperwork. These harbor clerks, you quickly learn, have their own unique relationship with the olive oil trade. There's the measuring, the recording, the signing, and, let's be honest, the occasional sly little sampling. A mainstream historical fact is that port inspectors sometimes help themselves to a bit of the cargo, just a ladle or two before declaring it properly logged. It was almost an unofficial bonus for their long hours of mind-numbing record-checking. As you shuffle closer, you see one clerk dipping a stick into a barrel, swirling it with a bored expression, then scribbling something in a ledger so dog-eared it looks older than his grandfather. A fringe tidbit here is that some of those ledgers were recycled, parchment scraped off with knives and rewritten until they were so thin they tore like onion skin. Historians still argue whether this was a sign of admirable frugality or just a sign of budget-starved chaos. The clerk eyes you over the barrel's rim, catching the shine of your permit. He motions you forward with a resigned wave, like a man who's measured enough olive oil to drown half of Anatolia. Your amphora is hoisted off your shoulder and plonked down onto a slanted wooden table, the pungent green-gold liquid sloshing inside. He tests it, gives it a swirl, a sniff, and a raised eyebrow of professional skepticism. Then, after a theatrical pause, he scribbles another mark in his ledger. There's something drowsy and hypnotic about watching the ink dry tiny rivulets forming on the rough paper, the scent of the oil mingling with stale sea air. Further down the pier, another official is yelling at a sailor, who apparently tried to sneak in a barrel without the right stamp. You can see the old wax seal crumbling off like cheap pastry. The official pokes at it with a stick, scowling, then tosses it aside with a disgusted sigh. You almost feel sorry for the sailor, almost until you remember that missing the paperwork could mean a hefty fine or even jail time. Byzantine rules didn't mess around when it came to olive oil. Your own documents pass the sniff test literally and figuratively, and you're waved onward. Somewhere behind you, a boy is already rolling your emptied amphora toward a wash station to get it cleaned and stamped again. You chuckle, because in the city, even an empty pot needs a permit before it can be refilled. Crossing the rickety wooden planks of the harbor, you glance at the glittering sea. Gulls wheel overhead, shrieking like cranky clerks who've lost their inkpots. Their wings flash bright white against the dusky sky, a reminder that Constantinople's harbors were as lively as any Grand Avenue, and just as tangled with rules. You notice a scribbled placard nailed to a crate oil declared at port under penalty of fine. As if anyone needed reminding. The Byzantines had an almost magical faith in the power of a posted sign, despite the fact that half the merchants could barely read. As you walk on, you feel a strange sense of camaraderie with these exhausted harbor workers. Each day they sniff, measure, mark, file, stamp, inspect, sign, and repeat, and all so a line of lamps might glow a few hours longer over the city's prayers. There's something noble in that, even if no one thanks them. Historians still argue whether these port officials were genuinely respected or universally hated. Maybe a bit of both. You picture one going home at night, his sleeves stiff with dried oil collapsing on a straw pallet, and dreaming of being anywhere else. One merchant tries to catch your sleeve-hawking vinegar in a cracked jug, but you wave him off politely. Tonight, you're too tired for side deals, too weighed down by the day's slow grind. The merchant shrugs and moves on hawking to the next poor soul lugging a permit. Eventually, you reach the warehouse, a dark, cool space with its own oily perfume. Barrels stand like squat sentinels, each marked with wax and chalk. You add yours to the line, watching the keeper note it down in a thin, trembling hand. He smiles faintly, maybe remembering your face from last week. There's something comforting in that, like seeing an old neighbor. The night rolls in blue and soft over the mass of the ships. You take a moment to watch a lantern bob on a prow mirrored in the water like a drifting star. Maybe you let your mind drift too, caught between the lapping waves and the rhythmic squeak of a donkey cart somewhere up the street. All that fuss over olive oil, and yet without it, the whole machine would sputter and die. You feel a tiny pride in being part of it, even if the pride is tangled with exasperation. Your thoughts float on the hush of evening, soothed by the slow dance of bureaucracy, where no one rushes and nothing changes too quickly. Tomorrow you think you'll do it all again, and that doesn't feel so bad. You leave the dim, barrel-scented warehouse behind and head into the maze of the city, where each district seems to have invented its own olive oil rulebook. One block will demand a double-stamped slip. The next might want a certificate from the priest. A third insists on measuring by the weight of the jug instead of its volume, leaving you shaking your head in sleepy frustration. Every village feeding olive oil into Constantinople seems to have its own petty lord, each convinced his local traditions deserve to stand above imperial regulation. That, of course, is how Byzantine life thrived and tangled a swirl of local customs layered on top of grand laws. A mainstream fact is that the Byzantine economy was intensely regional, so that olive oil from one valley might be taxed, measured, and even blessed differently than oil from a valley 20 miles away. The layers of local rights and privileges gave people a sense of pride and a headache. You shuffle along a street lined with pottery stalls, olive green jars stacked like sleeping puppies against the shop fronts. The sellers gossip about who got a new permit, who lost theirs, who bribed the inspector with a slice of fish pie last week. You'd laugh if it wasn't so familiar. Historians still argue whether these local bribes were tolerated as harmless folk tradition or quietly punished if discovered. Some scribes might have even considered the bribe part of doing business an unofficial processing fee that no one wrote down. As you watch, a nervous merchant tries to push through with a chipped amphora, shouting that his family always measures by the old village ladle. The inspector just raises an eyebrow and demands a certified weight slip instead. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you sense the absurdity, but a yawn slips past your lips anyway. Byzantine paperwork can lull you to sleep like no lullaby ever could. You pause at a well to rinse dust from your hands, letting cool water run between your fingers, and notice a line of travelers waiting with oil permits clutched in their fists. There's a young woman with a donkey loaded with oil jars nervously smoothing the folds of her blue tunic, and an old priest with a battered scroll case that looks like it fought off a small bear. All of them wait under the sleepy glare of a port official who seems more interested in picking sesame seeds out of his teeth than doing his job. Your own papers, crumpled and streaked with a bit of lamp soot, feel no more special than theirs. Maybe you smile faintly, realizing you're all bound together by the same dance of permits, stamps, and olive oil stains. In the distance, bells toll from a monastery tower. That ringing slices through the warm afternoon, reminding you that time is drifting forward, even if nothing ever seems to change. A fringe tidbit about some of these little monasteries is that they kept secret handwritten lists of friendly officials who could be trusted to sign off on missing permits if the olive oil ran late. Apparently the monks had learned to navigate the system with a quiet kind of cunning. After all, lamp oil waits for no man. You move past the well, following a narrow alley that seems to wind in a dozen contradictory directions. A skinny cat darts in front of you, tail twitching, probably sniffing for spilled fish oil. The smell of pressed olives mixes with the heavy sweetness of ripening figs from a nearby cart. Your stomach gives a polite little growl, reminding you that bureaucracy doesn't fill your belly. You check your next slip of parchment, squinting to read a scrawl of numbers. So faint, they look like tea stains. It declares how many amphorae you're allowed to transport past the eastern gate, and exactly which scribe will verify them. Just reading it feels exhausting, like trying to stay awake during a recited family tree. At the gate itself, a dozy guard raises one eyebrow as you approach. He takes your parchment, runs a slow finger along the seal, then seems to forget what he's doing halfway through, and stares off into space. Maybe he's thinking about his dinner. Maybe he's thinking about nothing at all. He shakes himself awake, stamps your paper with a dull thud, and hands it back. Past him, you see a ragged group of pilgrims coming in from the countryside, their eyes wide as they gawk at the city's scale. Some clutch tiny lampwick bundles in cloth satchels, hoping to light them in the grand churches. You feel a strange kinship with them, too. In the end, you're all just trying to keep a light burning somewhere somehow. With a gentle roll of your shoulders, you set off once more, your steps blending into the steady drone of commerce and chatter. Olive oil here, a slip of parchment there, the Byzantine puzzle constantly solving and resolving itself like an endless lullaby rocking you softly toward dusk. You press onward through a narrow corridor of arches, the stone echoing with muffled footsteps. Your next slip of paperwork folded like a precious prayer against your chest. Somewhere far above, birds settle on a slate roof, their faint cries weaving through the soft hush of early night. The moment feels peaceful, even as you think about the next checkpoint, because of course there's always another checkpoint. They say the shadow of Emperor Justinian still hangs over every olive oil barrel in Constantinople. His reforms from centuries earlier were so thorough, so mind-bendingly detailed, that traders still clutched receipts bearing his name long after he was dust. A mainstream fact is that Justinian's legal codes regulated all aspects of the olive oil trade, from how it was weighed to how it was transported to the types of containers merchants could use. Historians still argue whether Justinian's complicated olive oil licensing was truly meant to protect the public or simply to keep a hungry treasury fed. Either way, those rules refused to die. Even now, a monastery deacon might present a receipt so ancient its ink had faded to pale gray but still valid in the eyes of some stubborn inspector. You find it oddly soothing, like a bedtime story told over and over, that even a scrap of old law could keep a little lamp burning in a lonely chapel. That thread of history winds its way through the city, binding past to present one sealed amphora at a time. Up ahead, you notice a pair of harried monks with donkey carts, struggling to produce their own crumpled slips of authorization. One is half-torn, repaired, with what looks like fish glue still bearing the clumsy red wax of a seal. The checkpoint clerk, a burly man with a spectacularly droopy mustache, examines it with what might generously be called an expression of interest, then shrugs and waves them through. You try not to laugh because you know tomorrow someone else will ask those same monks to show that same glued-up parchment, and the dance will begin again. Byzantine bureaucracy had an endless appetite for checking, rechecking, and double-sealing even the smallest acts of trade. Further along, you spot a boy selling bread from a woven basket, singing a simple melody to draw in customers. The scent of warm wheat and olive oil floats around you, making you pause in sleepy appreciation. There's something beautiful about that bread, its crust glistening with a thin brush of fresh oil. It reminds you for a moment why the empire went through so much trouble to protect every drop. A fringe tidbit slips into your mind. Certain churches even kept a holy oil permit separate from the everyday cooking supply, so no one could accidentally dip bread in the sacred reserve. That might sound silly, but imagine biting into a loaf only to discover you'd stolen the flame meant for a saint's vigil. Your steps carry you past a small shrine where candles flicker under a painted icon, their flames gently bowing in the breeze. A thin wisp of olive-scented smoke coils around the stone archway, blurring the gold halos of saints in a dreamy shimmer. You can almost feel the prayers rising through that haze carried on the breath of oil and fire. The man beside you mumbles, trying to count how many permits he needs to renew before morning. His voice is hoarse with frustration, and you wonder how many times he's explained the same cargo to the same tired clerk. Yet he trudges onward, just like you resigned to the Byzantine way. You shift the amphora on your shoulder, feeling the slight sway of its contents. Another checkpoint waits near a gate, painted in faded blue, where a sleepy guard leans on a spear so casually you wonder if he could even lift it if needed. He glances at your parchment with an unimpressed grunt, stamps it with an old brass seal, and motions you through. Somewhere beyond, the deeper night has begun to settle over the city. Lanterns bloom like soft stars against the gathering dusk. You pause, letting the hush wash over you, noticing a woman lighting a small clay lamp for her children. The flame catches on the first try, warm and steady. Maybe it's worth the endless permits, you think, if it means that tiny moment, a mother lighting the dark for her family. That simple act links you to 1,000 others across Constantinople, all carrying a slip of parchment and a flicker of hope. Tomorrow you will cross these stones again, but for now you can rest in the comfort of olive-scented night, the city's heart beating under the gentle rule of Justinian's long-dead laws. You wake to the smell of warm bread, mingling with a note of crushed olives, the early sun spilling across the rooftops of Constantinople like honey. Your arms are already aching from carrying yesterday's amphorae, but there's no time to rest. Another round of permits waits for you. Today's destination is a desk piled with official documents where you apply for, yes, a permit, to apply for another permit. The Byzantines had a genius for turning a simple job into a labyrinth. It wasn't enough to get permission to trade olive oil. You needed a separate pass to approach the official, another to stand in the correct queue, and a third to take home the stamped receipts. A mainstream fact is that Byzantine administration relied on complex layers of hierarchy, so that every rank of clerk could show they'd personally approved or denied your slip of parchment. And historians still argue whether this was a sign of supreme organization or absolute madness. The layering of approvals meant no one person could easily cheat the system, but it also meant the average merchant might collapse under the weight of his own paperwork. You wander into the sunlit courtyard where a line is already formed. Traders, priests, a boy balancing a jar of lamp wicks, all of them shifting foot to foot, half awake, clutching their precious documents like a lifeline. A sleepy official behind a chipped marble counter glances up, expression blank as he waves you forward. You place your first slip on the counter. He squints at it, then gestures for the next slip, the one that gives you permission to show the first slip. A gentle sarcasm bubbles up in your thoughts, but you hold it back. Better to smile, breathe deep, and let the slow wheels turn. A fringe tidbit you might enjoy is that some monasteries hired professional permit couriers who could dance through these lines in record time, memorizing the guards' faces, remembering exactly which stamp to get first, which clerk might need a bribe of a honey cake. These quick-footed runners were the unsung heroes of the olive oil supply. The official picks up a dull brass stamp and presses it with a thud, so satisfying you almost doze off from the rhythm of it. The slip is handed back to you, its wax seal glinting a faint ruby red in the sun. One tiny victory until you remember you still need 4 more approvals before moving another jar. Your sandals scrape over the courtyard stones as you step away, hearing the murmur of a priest behind you complaining about a new rule that requires his lamps to burn a minimum number of hours per week or face a fine. The priest is halfway to tears, talking about how a windy night blew out every flame, and now he owes a penalty. You manage a sympathetic nod before the next guard waves you along. Beyond the courtyard arches, the city hums like a beehive. You pass a baker pounding dough, his hands slick with olive oil, the loaves shining with a golden crust. Even he has a permit tacked above his oven in greasy letters, proving he can use a measure of oil each morning. Bureaucracy reaches everywhere like ivy creeping through marble cracks. The street beyond is bright with sunlight, bouncing off painted shop signs, the colors warm against the gloom of half-finished stonework. You pause to watch an official carrying a stack of wax tablets tied with red string, their edges chipped from years of use. Those tablets are the backbone of Byzantine record-keeping, the empire's to-do list. One mainstream truth is that these wax tablets were reused so many times you could sometimes see old writing, faintly ghosting through the new, a sleepwalking history of paperwork layered upon paperwork. You step aside to let a donkey pass, its hooves clattering in a calm, rhythmic beat. A girl perched on its back hums a simple lullaby, half lost in the warmth of the morning. You wish you could climb up next to her and drift through the city that way, letting the donkey do the worrying. But there's still work to do. Another clerk, this one, perched on a high stool under a canopy, gestures you forward. He asks for your amphora's origin papers, then its inspection note, then its market approval. You hand them over, one by one, like a magician producing endless scarves. He flicks through them with a bored yawn, stamps them in triplicate, and hands them back. For a moment you stand still, a strange peace settling over you. The breeze ruffles your hair, smelling of hot bread, briny harbor air, and the faint tang of fresh olive oil. You realize that in a city so tangled with rules, no one can ever truly stand alone. There is always another slip, another checkpoint, another name, to sign a woven net that holds the city together, if a bit too tightly. You tuck your papers carefully into your belt, your shoulders heavy, but your heart surprisingly light. As the sun climbs higher, you turn toward the next inspection station, letting the sleepy routine guide you forward through a world where even the tiniest lamp flame depends on a mountain of crumbling wax seals. You drift onward through a lane lined with crumbling brick walls, the sun warming your shoulders, and the faint grassy aroma of olive oil clinging to the air. Ahead, you see a small monastery perched on a low hill, its tiled roof half missing, patched with scrap wood. The monks there have been waiting anxiously for your delivery, but not just the oil itself. They're hoping you'll slip a coin or two into the right official's palm to hurry things along. You step through the monastery gate, the hinges, squealing in protest, and spot a group of monks gathered around a ledger thicker than a butcher's chopping block. One is chewing nervously on a quill, trying to copy out a permit in careful, blocky letters. His ink is smudged across the parchment, blurring entire words. It might be funny if it weren't so familiar. Byzantine monks, for all their prayers and chants, still had to play the same game as any trader. A mainstream fact is that monasteries were massive consumers of olive oil, burning it in dozens of small chapel lamps day and night. Their hunger for oil was nearly unquenchable, and the bureaucracy never rested in making sure they proved every single amphora was permitted. You stand in line behind a monk in a patched wool robe, watching him slip a copper coin to a thin, hawk-nosed inspector. The man barely reacts, just slides the coin away as if it were a bit of stray lint. Then he leans over and stamps the monk's slip with a heavy bronze seal. No questions, no raised eyebrows. Done. Historians still argue whether the church turned a blind eye to these petty bribes or quietly took its own share. You shuffle closer, your amphora swaying against your hip, as another monk complains that his last delivery was delayed by 2 whole days thanks to a missing note about jar size. He gestures wildly as if describing a shipwreck, but the inspector only shrugs and waves him aside. A fringe tidbit seeps into your mind. There were whispered stories of monks who trained in a kind of permit poetry, memorizing complex verses that listed out every approval in the correct legal language. Supposedly, they would recite these chants at the city gates to avoid paying bribes. You wonder if that ever worked, or if the guards simply rolled their eyes and demanded a coin anyway. At last, it's your turn. The inspector squints at your documents, frowns as if reading through murky bathwater, then breaks the wax seal with a pop. You watch as he scribbles a note, dips a cheap iron stamp into an ink pot, and thuds it down with a sleepy flourish. Another step complete, like crossing a stepping stone over a lazy river. Inside the monastery courtyard, you see the novices carrying buckets of olive oil to refill a row of tiny red glass lamps. The flames shiver in the breeze, refusing to die, each one a symbol of prayer that never stops. For a moment, the chatter fades and you just listen to the fluttering hush of those flames like a whispered lullaby drifting through ancient stones. A soft voice interrupts you, a monk with a kindly face, who thanks you with a bow, then checks the amount of oil in your jug. He looks tired, but his smile is genuine. You get the sense that he, too, is worn down by the constant permit stamps and ledger entries. Yet he keeps going because someone must. You watch him measure the oil with a brass spoon, carefully noting every drop, then adding it to a book whose cover is worn nearly to threads. The pages inside look older than the monk himself, corners mended with wax drips and bits of linen. That book, you realize, is the monastery's record of every lamp, every wick, every prayer, made visible in flickering light. There's something deeply soothing in the routine, the quiet repetition, the flick of the measuring spoon, the faint rustle of robes. The monks have turned this ritual into a slow, steady rhythm that feels almost holy, even if it is tangled in Byzantine paperwork. As you leave the monastery, the oil amphora finally empty, you look back at the archway with its faded blue paint peeling like fish scales. You know you'll be back soon with another cargo, another armload of permits. But for now, there's a strange peace in having completed today's run, no matter how small. Past the gates, the road stretches back toward the harbor, the air tasting of salt and warm stone. You let your steps settle into their familiar beat, the same steps countless traders and monks have taken over, centuries bound together by olive oil ink and the quiet glow of faith. You head downhill toward the merchant quarter, where traders hawk everything from raisins to rough wool cloaks, their voices weaving a lazy chorus over the steady clatter of carts. The sun has slipped behind a high wall, leaving the street in a cool blue shade that smells of pressed olives and damp parchment. You run your hand along your belt, checking that your new permits are still tucked safely there, wax seals only slightly softened by the afternoon heat. In a quiet alcove near the forum, a pair of oil counters hunch over a battered wooden table, their ledgers splayed open like wounded birds. These men, neither nobles nor slaves, occupy a strange middle ground, middle-ranking bureaucrats whose only mission is to record record. One mainstream historical fact is that Byzantine administration relied on such middlemen, sometimes called chartularioi, to keep the paperwork flowing while the higher officials looked on from marble halls. You step closer, watching the clerks measure and mark. Their fingers are stained with ink and the parchment edges smudged with oil where careless hands have touched them again and again. You almost feel sorry for the clerks. No matter how many seals they break and stamps they thud down, there will always be another amphora, another line of numbers, another slip to be copied. One clerk looks up at you with red-rimmed eyes, clearly fighting off sleep, then waves you forward. You place your cargo slip down gently, trying not to wrinkle the edge. The clerk studies it, tracing the lines with a chewed-up stylus, and then records it with a flourish of cramped letters. A fringe tidbit is that some clerks developed a sort of shorthand so cryptic that even other scribes struggled to read it, a secret code to speed up endless entries. Historians still argue whether these shortcuts were meant to protect honest records or hide a bribe or two. Past their table, you see an amphora being inspected with a brass dipstick. The clerk's hands shake a little as he measures the oil rippling like gold leaf in the faint light. Then he notes something on his wax tablet, rubs the surface smooth again, and starts fresh for the next customer. like a lullaby that routine repeats and repeats, gently lulling you into a soft haze. You shift your weight and study the clerks a moment longer. Their benches are rough-hewn, the cushions flattened by years of tired bodies. A lamp swings overhead, the flame quivering with every draft of sea air from the open window. One clerk scratches his ear absently, leaving a streak of black ink across his cheek, but doesn't even notice. Beyond them, a group of traders argue about jar weights. One insists his amphora is legal because it matches the old measure from a village far to the east. Another swears by a new city standard. The clerks sigh in chorus, lifting measuring sticks and copper scales, trying to soothe the merchants like tired teachers with bickering children. It is oddly comforting to stand in that swirl of confusion, knowing the same scene has likely played out 1,000 times before and will play out 1,000 times again. The walls of the Forum have heard these same arguments since the days of Justinian, echoing through centuries with a resigned shrug. Your own inspection goes quickly. The oil counters measure note and wave you off with a bored grunt already turning to the next dusty slip thrust in their faces. As you leave, you catch a final glimpse of their ink-streaked ledgers, page after page after page, all recording the same dull cargo. And yet without those pages, the empire would stumble. The sun returns from behind the wall, turning the clay tiles overhead into warm copper. You pause on the threshold, breathing in the faintly sharp scent of vinegar from a fishmonger's stall, mixing with the rich olive smell still clinging to your clothes. It is a sleepy, comforting fragrance woven into the fabric of daily Byzantine life. Pigeons scuttle around your feet as you move on your steps, slow and measured the same way they must have been for countless other carriers long before you. Each permit in your belt, each scratchy note on a wax tablet, is a tiny part of keeping the empire's lamps burning. You wonder if centuries from now anyone will remember these clerks, these ledgers, these tiny stamped slips. Maybe they will, or maybe they'll just remember the quiet light of an olive oil lamp shining out across the night. For now, the routine feels like a gentle cradle, rocking you forward through the dusk. Permit by permit, amphora by amphora, you carry a piece of that light with you, certain that someone somewhere is waiting for it to reach them. You shift your shoulder beneath the weight of another freshly loaded amphora, its clay sides warm from sitting in the sun, and trudge along the broken flagstones toward a different checkpoint. Your permit flutters against your tunic, sealed in streaky red wax that already shows cracks. Ahead, the line snakes through a pair of crumbling marble pillars, everyone clutching their papers with the same cautious hope. At this checkpoint, a worn sign declares, "Approved measures only." The words are half chipped away, but everyone understands what they mean. Byzantine weights and measures were notoriously inconsistent. One merchant might swear an amphora holds 26 liters, another 28, and a third might claim 30, depending on which village his grandmother once lived in. A mainstream fact is that Byzantines tried to enforce standard measurements for trade, but local variations made it nearly impossible to truly standardize. One clerk sighs so deeply it rattles his ribs as he tries to sort it out. A trader shoves forward with a copper weight shaped like a small loaf of bread, swearing on his father's beard that it's official. The inspector holds it up to the light suspiciously, then sets it down on the balance scale, frowning at the result. Historians still argue whether these chaotic weights were due to genuine local pride or sly cheating. After all, if no one agrees what an official jar even holds, it's easy to slip a little oil away on the side. You can feel the gentle frustration simmering in the line, a sort of resigned lullaby that echoes through the port day after day. The inspector finally stamps your parchment with a thump that sounds as final as a closing door, then waves you through. You step aside to let the next merchant argue over a chipped amphora, the debate starting up again like an old folk song. A fringe tidbit drifts through your thoughts in a few scattered villages. People measured olive oil not by volume or weight, but by how many lamp wicks it could keep burning for a certain number of hours. Imagine standing in front of an inspector arguing that your oil is perfectly measured because it keeps 20 wicks going till dawn. You nearly laugh out loud, but the guards might think you'd gone mad. You balance your cargo with a steady grip and slip down a shaded alley where the scent of fermenting grapes mixes with the tang of iron tools. In a small courtyard, a group of apprentices are testing their scales, carefully polishing copper weights to a mirrored shine. Their teacher corrects them with a tap of his cane, reminding them that mistakes in weighing could mean a fine, a lost shipment, or worse, a week trapped in paperwork purgatory. You pause to watch them drawn in by the quiet repetition of copper sliding against copper, a soft, metallic lull that seems to calm your pulse. Their careful practice feels timeless, each measure an echo of measures long past. Beyond the courtyard, you pass another checkpoint, yes, another where a clerk rubs his temples and tries to tally the day's barrels on a wax tablet so full of numbers it looks like a sea of ants. His stylus hesitates, then scratches out one line before adding a fresh total. You wonder if he dreams of numbers, if in his sleep he still counts barrels that never stop arriving. You slip past with a polite nod, heading toward the docks, where another barge is unloading amphorae. The crew shouts back and forth, trying to decide whose paperwork is missing this time. You can practically feel their frustration rolling off them in waves, but also a kind of pride, because no matter how tangled the system, the city still eats, still prays, still shines its lamps night after night. A donkey brays somewhere behind you, pulling a cart piled high with oil jars, each one marked with a bright chalk X showing it had passed inspection, or at least passed enough not to draw the guard's ire. The donkey's hooves make a muffled rhythm on the dirt, steady and hypnotic, carrying you forward with it, as if you're both part of the same sleepy caravan. The day begins to cool, and you notice a fine mist of sea air drifting in from the Golden Horn, settling gently on your skin like a blessing. You breathe it in, letting your shoulders loosen, your heart beat calm. Olive oil permits weights and stamps. All these things so heavy in daylight now seem softer, like a lullaby as night approaches. Up ahead, a lamplighter leans from a ladder, lighting the first flame of the evening. It catches bright and steady, and you realize how many hands, including yours, have made that little flame possible. That thought alone is enough to carry you through the final checkpoint past the last tired clerk and into the growing hush of twilight where Constantinople's lamps wait patiently to be fed. Your feet feel heavy as you push through the crowded street, the sun, now only a pale memory behind the rooftops. Somewhere a harp is plucking a gentle tune, its notes fluttering over the steady clop of donkey hooves and the faint creak of wagons. The air is thick with the familiar perfume of olive oil, warm clay, and a trace of damp wool from cloaks airing out after a long day. You pass another checkpoint near the ministries, where officials wear layers of colored sashes and hats that announce rank, each more bewildering than the last. Titles upon titles, yet no one seems quite sure who is actually in charge. One mainstream fact is that Byzantine administration was famously top-heavy with overlapping layers of officials who sometimes issued contradictory orders about the same cargo. A merchant ahead of you tries to argue about his papers, waving them like a distressed seagull. The clerk, unimpressed, stamps them anyway, then stamps them again just to be certain, shrugging as if to say, "Better too many seals than too few." You catch yourself smiling at that. It feels oddly comforting in a sleepy sort of way to see that even in chaos there is a rhythm. Historians still argue whether these ministries actually made trade safer or simply buried it under so many rules that no one dared cheat. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, like so much Byzantine life. You shuffle ahead, your amphora balanced against your hip, the clay still warm from the day's sun. The street grows darker as you step under a high arch. The oil jars are lined up along the wall like soldiers awaiting inspection. A bored clerk picks one at random, sniffing at the seal, then poking the stopper with a thin brass rod. You try not to giggle, it all feels so solemn for something as simple as cooking oil. A fringe tidbit slips through your thoughts. There were whispered jokes that a merchant could bribe half the ministry and still forget to bribe the one guy who actually unlocked the warehouse door. Those rumors had a hint of truth, you suspect. In a world this tangled, even a perfect slip of parchment might hit a brick wall of confusion. You step past another oil merchant arguing about a shipment lost to a clerical error so strange it sounds made up. The ledger apparently recorded 10 amphorae of air instead of olive oil. No one knows who wrote it or why, but now he can't get paid. You stifle a yawn, amused by how even a colossal empire can trip over its own ink. Beyond the ministries, the street opens into a plaza where the faint sound of prayers drifts from a small chapel. The lamplight there is dim dancing softly against icons of saints who seem to watch over the entire city. Their golden halos shimmer in the dusk, their painted eyes solemn yet calm. You breathe a bit easier in their presence, reminded that all this fuss, the stamps, the ledgers, the wrinkled slips of parchment, serves a purpose. Without these tiny flames, the night would feel endless. A merchant selling figs gestures for your attention, but you wave him off gently. Your mind is wrapped around the path ahead, another checkpoint, another set of forms, and then finally a chance to rest. Somewhere beyond these walls, families will gather around a lamp filled with oil you helped deliver children, studying their letters by its glow. You cross to the next inspector, a short, tired man with a wax tablet so worn it looks like driftwood. He barely glances at your permit before stamping it, then moves on to the next trader. You wonder if he even notices whose name is written there anymore. Maybe it doesn't matter. The process has become its own lullaby, a ritual that soothes even as it frustrates. Your sandals scuff against the worn marble of the plaza steps. The sky overhead is sliding toward a deep violet, and a breeze picks up carrying the faint brine of the golden horn, mixed with lamp smoke. You pause to soak in that air, letting your muscles ease for a moment. Then, with a resigned sigh, you grip your amphora and step forward again, following the flow of permits, the gentle chaos and the endless dance of trade that keeps this city glowing. Olive oil, after all, is more than food. It is light warmth and the thin shield that stands between fear and the dark. And so you press on each checkpoint a kind of heartbeat, steady and familiar, guiding you through the Byzantine maze, one sleepy step at a time. The plaza fades behind you as you follow a winding slope, down to the waterside, where the air grows sharp with the scent of salt and tar. Seagulls wheel overhead, shrieking over scraps tossed by fishmongers cleaning the day's catch. Ahead, the broad expanse of the Golden Horn stretches out, dotted with masts and low-slung cargo barges, nudging one another like restless cattle. There, at the water's edge, stands another checkpoint, the Golden Horn toll. This place is the Empire's true choke point, a bottleneck for every jar of olive oil entering or leaving the city. An inspector leans on a rough-hewn table, half asleep, the end of his stylus poking at a splinter in the wood. His eyes go round as he sees you approach with your permit. A mainstream fact is that Byzantines charged tolls at nearly every crossing of the Golden Horn. The money paid for soldiers' repairs to bridges, and of course the ever-hungry city bureaucracy. Olive oil, so common and so vital, was no exception to these endless tolls. You offer your paperwork, trying to keep your expression politely blank. The inspector squints at the seal, rubs a thumb across the faded wax, then scrawls something in a ledger, so stained it looks like it's been through a dozen storms. Finally, he waves you forward, but not before scratching a quick mark on your amphora itself, a chalk circle proof you'd paid the toll. Ami historians still argue whether these toll marks were always legal or sometimes invented on the spot by bored officials seeking a quick bonus. It's hard to say. The marks look both authoritative and suspiciously random, and it's easy to imagine a clerk inventing a new fee if the mood struck. A fringe tidbit. You might enjoy some guards were rumored to carry their own personal chalks in their pockets, so they could claim a merchant had missed a toll and fine them a second time. Byzantium had a kind of oily poetry about it, didn't it? You shuffle onward into the checkpoint's maze of ropes barrels and grumbling men. Olive oil jars are everywhere, stacked like squat, sleepy sentinels in rows, each one waiting its moment to cross. A small cat dozes between two amphorae, the warm clay holding the day's last heat, its breathing slow and even. A donkey driver behind you curses softly as a jug slips and cracks, a thin greenish stream of oil spreading across the paving stones. The inspector rushes over, shouting about unpaid fees, and the donkey brays as if to argue back. You sidestep the mess, shaking your head with a faint grin. Only in Constantinople, you think, would oil spills be a problem of accounting rather than safety. Ahead, another clerk counts coins with methodical taps, arranging them in neat stacks by denomination before sweeping them into a battered box. He barely looks up as he tallies fees and stamps permits, his hand moving so smoothly. You wonder if he ever sleeps at all. Beyond the checkpoint, the harbor's wooden piers sprawl like outstretched fingers into the sea. Lanterns flicker along them, casting small circles of golden light on the dark water. You can see a procession of porters balancing amphorae on their shoulders, stepping carefully so they don't slip on the wet planks. The whole place hums with quiet industry, a lullaby in the hush of night. You pause to rest your own amphora propped against a low wall and watch a trio of priests negotiating passage fees. Their robes are splattered with wax from hours of candle, tending their sandals cracked from so many trips to collect olive oil. Even their faith must bow to paperwork. It is a humbling thing, this empire of rules. And yet there's a calm in it, too, a reminder that even the smallest flame burning in a church somewhere depends on thousands of tiny details lining up just so. That order, as frustrating as it feels, brings a certain peace. The cat between the jars stirs, blinking sleepily, then curls up tighter, the tip of its tail twitching. A breeze ruffles your hair, smelling of the briny sea, and you feel your eyelids grow heavy, just watching the steady lantern light dancing across the water. Somewhere beyond this checkpoint, the city's night comes alive. Songs echoing through tavern doors, ship bells ringing softly, prayers whispered behind closed wooden shutters. All of it wrapped in a haze of olive oil and warm lamp glow, the heartbeat of Byzantium pulsing on. You rise again, amphora lifted to your shoulder, and follow the line forward, one step, one toll, one stamped slip at a time as Constantinople rocks you gently onward. You cross the final planks of the harbor checkpoint, your amphora, marked, stamped, and blessed by half a dozen weary clerks. The air grows richer here, layered with a note of spices drifting from the palace kitchens beyond the great gates. The smell of cinnamon, cumin, and clove mingles with the ever-present olive oil, a reminder that even emperors depended on these humble jars to feed their daily fires. Within sight of the great palace walls, another checkpoint rises, but this one is different. A guard stands beside a list nailed to a pillar, carefully separating church oil from palace oil. Each must be tracked, measured, and labeled with no exceptions. A mainstream fact is that Byzantine officials kept these oil streams separate for centuries, so the emperor's table never accidentally burned. The lamp oil meant for holy icons. You shuffle forward, showing your papers once more. The inspector here is sharper than most eyes, bright even after what must have been a long day. He sniffs the seal, cracks it, and examines the note listing exactly where your oil will go. Satisfied, he marks it with a stylus dipped in dark ink. Historians still argue whether these distinctions were truly respected in practice. Tales drift through the centuries of palace cooks, sneaking lamp oil into their stew pots during shortages, while churches were rumored to pilfer the palace's best supply if no one was looking. The lines blurred as they always do when rules meet human hunger. A fringe tidbit comes to mind sometimes. A desperate monk would swap the palace's premium low-smoke oil with ordinary, smoky press oil, then claim a miraculous supply had appeared. A cheeky move, but the empire's web of paperwork usually caught them in the end. You step aside while a porter hoists another amphora onto a cart bound for the palace kitchens. The clay clinks gently against the wooden wheels, a lullaby of industry rolling through the courtyard. Another servant rushes up with a note requesting emergency oil for the night's vigil candles, in the chapel stamped 3 times, in case anyone doubted its truth. The courtyard bustles, yet feels oddly peaceful. Pigeons peck at stray wheat grains by the marble fountain, ignoring the swirl of shouting porters and scribes. You watch one hop across a trail of spilled oil, leaving little footprints that glisten before fading into the dust. In one corner, a girl with a basket of wicks counts them out carefully, matching each to a separate slip of parchment pinned to her apron. Her voice is calm, rhythmic as she checks them off, and it soothes you to hear someone else performing this endless ritual without complaint. You find a shady spot by a column to rest, letting your breath even out the weight of the day, pressing gently into your bones. All around you, voices rise and fall, overlapping in an easy hum. The palace guard tells a joke about oil jars being more carefully guarded than gold. Someone laughs low and warm, a moment of shared humanity. A donkey clatters past, pulling a cart loaded with tiny amphorae for the empress's personal kitchen. Even these bear separate stamps, carefully inked on bits of parchment tied around their necks with string. Byzantium had a rule for everything you think a comforting kind of tyranny, that in its predictability makes you feel oddly safe. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the gentle splash of the fountain. Beyond the walls, bells ring the evening hour, summoning monks to prayers lit by the very oil you helped carry. Somewhere a candle flares up in answer, its small, bright flame steady and sure. Rising once more, you adjust your amphora on your shoulder and step forward, guided by that familiar path. Palace oil one way, church oil another, but both depending on your quiet labor. You feel a tiny spark of pride that your steps help feed both faith and empire, day after day. The breeze shifts, carrying a breath of sea air and the distant perfume of orange blossoms from a garden you will never see. For a moment you are suspended between the smell of empire and the hush of prayer, between palace kitchens and holy altars, all bound together by a simple jar of oil. And somehow that is enough to keep you moving one gentle, measured step at a time. The palace checkpoint shrinks behind you as you move back into the merchant's quarter, where the lamps are beginning to wake with their golden glow. Every doorway seems to sprout a small flame, dancing softly against the darkening sky. But with every flame comes another list of rules, another parchment to sign. A hush of resignation seems to fall across the street as traders and clerks prepare for the nightly fees, fines, and little traps woven through the city's oil laws. You pause near a low-arched arcade where merchants stand arguing under the watch of two sleepy inspectors. These inspectors wield wax tablets so battered they look like relics from another age, recording even the smallest detail of every shipment. The fines they announce can be steep. Forgetting a signature might cost a week's wages, or worse, the loss of permission to trade at all. One mainstream fact is that Byzantine authorities issued entire scrolls of penalties for oil traders, including fines for missing a single drop when transferring oil from one jar to another. They saw olive oil not just as trade, but as a vital resource requiring absolute control. A fringe tidbit makes you smirk. Some scribes took such pride in their rule-enforcing power that they added fake fees just to see if a merchant would notice. Imagine paying the Holy Wick tax only to learn it was made up by a bored scribe. Historians still argue whether these phantom fees were ever officially sanctioned or simply the product of opportunistic imaginations. You shift your amphora again, legs beginning to ache as a pair of boys scurry past with wicks in their hands, chanting a little rhyme about never let your oil run dry. It feels like a lullaby wrapped inside a lesson, a chant their grandmothers probably sang to them. At the far side of the arcade, a guard holds out a palm, ready to collect another fee from a merchant whose jar is missing a stamp. The merchant protests, showing ink smudged on the side where the seal had been, but it's no use. The guard shrugs and demands a coin anyway. Byzantine bureaucracy could be flexible if it meant getting paid. You pass under a linen awning fluttering gently in the breeze, the lamp flames beyond it shining through like small golden coins. One trader is recounting how he nearly lost his permit after forgetting to list the name of the official who gave him permission to refill his amphora. That means a fine, of course. Everything meant a fine. Yet there is something calming in the predictability of it all, like a child who can only sleep if he knows exactly which lullaby verse comes next. Constantinople found peace in its routine, even when that routine made no sense. You step out of the arcade, following the familiar pattern. Show your papers, check the seal, pay the fee. Over and over, a ritual that links every part of this glittering, tired empire together. You see a lamplighter pause to rub a sore shoulder, then climb back up to trim a flame. His eyes glassy from fatigue, but still carrying a kind of quiet pride. Past him, another checkpoint appears because, of course, there is always another checkpoint. This one is guarded by a soldier so young his beard is barely more than fuzz. He peers at your parchment with a frown, then looks relieved when he sees the correct stamp. No bribes today, just a sleepy nod, and you are through. For a moment you stand still, letting the night settle around you. The lamps gleam on every street corner, their tiny flames a chorus of hushes, echoing through the marble arches. The steady beat of fines fees, signatures, and stamps has become part of the city's music, a slow, patient lullaby that keeps the dark away. As you shift your amphora one last time, a merchant beside you complains about losing half his profit to forgotten permits, but still smiles because his lamps will stay lit tonight. That, in the end, seems enough. You follow the lamplighter's faint scent of soot and olive oil down the quiet street, reminded again that even the most frustrating bureaucracy has a purpose. Without it, the night would grow darker, the prayers would go unlit, and the city would lose a little piece of its soul. So you keep moving, one fine, one fee, one flame at a time, through the endless lull of Byzantine law. Your steps lead you away from the merchant's arcade, following a quieter back street where shadows pool against chipped walls. The lamps here seem more timid, their flames smaller, almost hiding from the night breeze. You feel the weight of your amphora shift balanced against your aching hip, while a dog barks half-heartedly somewhere deeper in the city's maze. This is where the rumors gather the whispers of olive oil smugglers who slip past bored guards after dusk. They move like soft-footed cats, carrying unmarked jars through tiny alleys, paying off the occasional sentry with a copper coin or a half loaf of bread. It is a soft rebellion, wrapped in candlelight and half-lies. A mainstream fact is that Byzantine inspectors caught smuggling rings from time to time, sometimes confiscating entire shipments and auctioning them right back to the highest bidder, a neat, if shady, way of feeding the treasury. Historians still argue whether the government quietly encouraged the seeing it as an unofficial tax, or if they were genuinely outraged and trying to stamp it out. You pass a low doorway where two men stand murmuring, one holding a lantern that wobbles with every nervous breath. He guards an amphora stamped with no mark at all, a dangerous thing in this city. The second man leans close, whispering so softly you almost can't catch the words. A fringe tidbit about smugglers. Sometimes they disguise stolen olive oil in amphorae, labeled as fish sauce, since no one wanted to stick their nose into a barrel of fermenting anchovies. Clever, if a bit stomach-turning. You step carefully around them, eyes lowered, pretending you see nothing. The best way to survive Byzantine night trade is to look busy, to look legal, and to keep moving. The guards usually do the same, half-blind in the gloom, more interested in a warm drink than chasing small-time smugglers. As you press forward, your sandals scuff on broken cobbles. The street smells of tar and faintly of herbs. Someone somewhere is boiling lentil soup for a late meal. That comfort seeps through the city, a reminder that beyond all these permits and ledgers, people are still simply trying to feed their families, light their lamps, and chase away the dark. You reach another checkpoint, this one almost laughably informal. A guard slumped on a crate, trying to stay awake, a wax tablet slipping from his fingers. When he spots you, he blinks, shrugs, and barely waves you past eyes already closing again. You exhale a small, relieved breath. Further down the city wall looms tall stone, and pockmarked with centuries of patchwork repairs. An arched side gate stands half open, watched by one dozing soldier who only rouses when the wind makes his spear clatter. It's through gaps like these that the rumor trail of smuggled oil moves jars wrapped in straw and passed hand to hand under moonlight. A candle burns low in a window above you, its wick throwing a wavery shadow on the stone. You wonder who lights it each night and whether their oil came from the ports, the monasteries, or one of those quiet smuggling routes. There's a strange gentleness in knowing the flame still glows, no matter how the jar arrived. As you turn along the base of the wall, you glimpse another trader, wheeling a cart with no permit, pinned to its side, moving quickly through the gloom. A dog sniffs at the wheels, then trots away, bored. Smuggling in Byzantium was more about routine than drama. Small barrels, quiet handshakes, fading footprints in the dust. Past the gate, you can hear the soft shuffle of guards, changing shifts, their voices thick with sleep. They barely look your way, trusting the night to keep its own order. It often does. One last glance over your shoulder catches a young boy carrying a jar almost as big as himself, a slip of paper clutched so tight it's nearly tearing. He stumbles but rights himself, determined to follow the rules even as others bend them. That's the city in miniature, a constant dance between what is written and what is lived. And you keep moving through that dance, breathing in the cool night, guided by lamplight, your own jar of oil pressing warm against your side, a tiny bulwark against the endless Byzantine dark. The hush of night deepens as you leave the city wall behind and step into a side street lined with shuttered workshops. Here the world feels slower, the stones cooler, as if Constantinople herself is finally exhaling after a day of relentless counting, stamping, measuring. Your amphora grows heavier with each step, though by now the ache has turned familiar, even comforting a quiet reminder that you're part of something steady, however absurd it might seem. You watch a lamplighter shuffle past, balancing a pot of oil with practiced ease. He moves like a dancer, tipping just enough into each lamp before trimming the wicks, his face calm and distant. The flame leaps up every time a tiny spark of courage against the dark. One mainstream fact is that Byzantine lamplighters worked night after night to keep every district's corners lit, an unofficial defense against thieves and spirits alike. A boy runs behind him carrying a basket of fresh wicks, almost tripping in his hurry. You see the small slip of parchment pinned to his belt. Even these wicks, so simple and small, needed a stamped approval. Byzantium's love of paperwork truly spared no one. You shift closer to a fountain whose water runs cool and clear, washing the dust from your hands. The reflections ripple gently under the street's lamps, catching the gleam of your amphora's glaze. For a moment you pause to breathe, letting the city's heartbeat settle into a gentler rhythm. A fringe tidbit floats to mind. In some neighborhoods, olive oil permits were so tangled that entire families shared a single slip for years, patching and re-inking it until it was more whole than parchment. Historians still argue whether inspectors actually tolerated these patched-up papers or simply looked the other way out of pity. Beyond the fountain, you glimpse the steps of a church where a priest carefully counts out drops of oil for a single vigil, lamp eyes red from sleepless nights. He pauses to greet you, nodding gravely, then turns back to his work. His hands shake a bit, yet his movements are steady, a paradox you understand all too well. You continue onward, the sounds of the city growing softer with every block. Distant singing echoes through a shuttered courtyard, a lullaby carried on the night wind. A woman lights a lamp in her window, her children gathering around it with books, eager to read just a few more pages before sleep. You feel a deep, warm peace knowing that oil your oil makes that moment possible. A guard emerges from a doorway, yawns, and checks your parchment one last time. He runs a thumb across the wax, finds no reason to complain, and lets you pass. You nod in thanks, moving with a calm surety through this ritual that binds the city together in the simplest way, through trust, through repetition, through a million small flames. Somewhere above you, an owl calls from the dark rafters of a half-finished roof, its cry long and soft. You look up and catch a piece of sky, clear and velvet black, scattered with distant stars. It feels timeless, like the laws you've obeyed all day, like the olive oil ledgers that will still be written centuries after you are dust. And so you walk on past a cluster of children, chasing each other around an old stone basin, their laughter weaving through the night. Your steps fall into their rhythm, calm, even familiar. You feel the lamp oil shift in your amphora, hear the faint glug of it sloshing against clay, and know you've done what was needed. Permits signed, deliveries made the city ready for another night of soft golden light. Letting your breath grow long and slow, you follow the path back toward your own doorway, the city sighing around you, every lamp a promise, every tiny flame a prayer. The empire's rules may twist and turn, but the steady glow remains a beacon against fear, a hush against the chaos. In this moment, you let go of the counting, the signatures, the guards, the forms. There is only the soft, golden light ahead. and the comforting dark behind. And so, with your final amphora resting at the foot of your own threshold, you pause to feel the night air wrap around your shoulders. Its hush is deep and gentle, the kind of hush that asks you to rest, to soften every tense muscle, to let the warmth of your day's work slip away. Somewhere in the city, those little lamps you helped fuel are still burning their tiny flames, swaying slightly with the evening breeze. Each one a steady companion, a sign that Byzantium, for all its tangled rules and endless scrolls, has found peace again for one more night. You listen to the faint lull of the wind drifting across tiled roofs, carrying with it a scent of old stone and fading olive oil so familiar it feels like a friend's voice. The guards at the gates grow quiet. The scribes lay down their styluses, and even the restless traders fold away their wrinkled papers for tomorrow. The city eases into sleep, a gentle blanket woven from its own stubborn routines, from its own 1,000-year heartbeat. You take one last breath, letting it fill your lungs, then exhale into the calm. Somewhere a mother hums a lullaby to her children under a lamp you helped keep alight. The thought brings a soft, quiet smile to your lips. Now close your eyes, sink into the softness of your bed, and let your mind wander through this gentle maze of lamp flames and slow measured steps. Trust that the city will hold until morning. Trust that the lamps will burn steady. Trust that your dreams can drift easy and unafraid. Sweet dreams, traveler.